Now, welcome along. Champions Cup quarter-finals are upon us. Happy to say in studio, he is Bordeaux bound. Cian Tracey of the Irish Independent. Hello, you're very welcome.
Bonjour.
We're not jealous. Will Slattery is here.
Hello, Joe.
Producer of Indo Sport, host of the Left Wing podcast, freshly back from La Rochelle. It was going to be just me and Cian, and you said, you know, it's a big week. Put me in, coach.
Couldn't help himself.
Yeah. With my producer's hat on, I said, you know what this needs? Will Slattery.
Yeah.
Well, we were all jealous of you last weekend, to be fair, in La Rochelle. So.
And rightly so. It was as good as it looked on television. I'm still like...
The FOMO was very strong. It was made even worse, I have to admit, by being at Croke Park, which was just a non-event. And actually, I had managed to avoid the score in the Munster game. I told a few colleagues who were there afterwards, please don't tell me what's happening in the Munster game. I have it recorded at home. Got home, had the radio off the whole way home. Got home, watched the game. It had just been half time by the time I watched it. And the recording on my Skybox cut out as La Rochelle scored their converted try in the 77th minute. And I didn't know what had happened. So I frantically had to scramble, and I got a recording from somewhere and saw the last 2 minutes about half an hour later. It was not a good way to watch a match, I have to admit.
Yeah, that's not being there.
It was like the old days of... I don't know if you've... No, of course, yeah, but it was like the old days of avoiding the match of the day scores. And then
I do that all the time.
Do you?
Oh, yeah.
Jeez, I think that is fair going in this day and age. I'm just so glued to my phone, which isn't good.
Yeah, but I just hang out on the Daily Mail showbiz section. I'm still on my phone. So quarterfinal stages are upon us. Friday night lights at the Aviva Stadium. Leinster Glasgow is 8 o'clock. Saturday 3 o'clock Irish time. Bordeaux host Munster, and we also have Toulon Toulouse and Northampton Cast. So I make that the 2 Irish provinces, 4 French teams, 1 Scottish, 1 English. Ifs and buts, of course. If La Rochelle had beaten Munster, which is very plausible. Got to be 5 French clubs and 1 from the rest. So French rugby having a bit of a moment. Our rugby coverage is brought to you by Energia. Energia's Half a Fan campaign is calling on Irish rugby fans to bring their great support to the women's team as well in this year's Six Nations. If you love Irish rugby, you can't be half a fan. Ireland's final home game of the tournament in Cork against England on Saturday. They've named their team. We will touch on that game as well, albeit... I think we'll have a fair chance how it'll probably go against England. That is the way of the Women's Six Nations at the moment. Quarterfinal weekend. Ian Madigan on Monday's podcast said the best club rugby weekend of the year. And then Will burst my bubble by saying, can we just mention the decline of the once great quarterfinal weekend? Only 3 of the last 20 quarterfinals were one-score games.
Yeah.
It is a very Will Slattery stat, I have to admit. You can always rely on you.
So the last 5 years, only 3 of them have lived up to what historically I would agree with Dean, the famous scalps that have thrown the tournament wide open. And another degree of unpredictability was it used to be a draw for the semi-final, so your seeding in the pools didn't guarantee a home advantage all the way. But with the advent of the new format, which kind of gives you a kind of a locked-in structure if the good teams keep winning, and with how dominant, say, Leinster, Toulouse, La Rochelle have been in the last few years, there hasn't been as many surprises. So, and looking at the fixture list for this weekend and the handicaps that have already been posted, it's hard to see where the shocks might come. Munster probably still best place, but yeah, the once great weekend, like the rest of the tournament, is probably fading a touch.
What were the great ones of recent years?
Recent years, so the three one-score goals. So last year, Bordeaux Quins was 42-41. It was kind of that madcap helter-skelter game. To be fair, one of them was a Bordeaux Racing 24-21 all penalties. It wasn't exactly one you're going to tell the grandkids about. And to be fair, there was a Leinster Exeter one during COVID, which didn't finish within 1 score. That was an absolute belter. You probably remember that when Leinster came from behind. They conceded 2 tries in the first couple of minutes. So there's a couple of outliers, but in the round, that stat pretty... gives a good reading of actually there's a lot of lopsided scores in there, much like we saw last weekend.
Does this tournament have a good round anymore?
The final.
The final. I still think there'll be really good games, I have to admit, this weekend in the quarterfinal. It's just a pity that we haven't had more time to actually properly digest, the weekend that was, which is just a flaw in the tournament, the structure of the tournament, which I believe they are going to look at. I
have another flaw in the tournament. Again, Will Slattery's notes. Full of positivity. An unlikely source of sympathy, the English clubs in the Champions Cup, who've, look, you asked for this, English clubs. You ripped up a once great format. The Champions Cup format, says Will, it puts English clubs at a distinct disadvantage. They are the only clubs who have to play both French teams and have to travel to South Africa in the pool stages. This doesn't apply to French or URC clubs.
I think that's significant because the seeding then dictates the knockout bracket. Say Northampton Saints won the Premiership, they had to go to play the Bulls. Now they did win in Pretoria, but that's usually a very tricky proposition. They also had to go to Stade Francais where they lost, so in the round it probably evened out. But obviously if you're a French club, you don't play other French teams, so you're cutting out a whole swath of really strong teams you don't have to face. For Leinster and Munster, they don't have to play in South Africa, so that's a massive advantage for them in the pool stage as well. The English clubs are the only ones who are kind of up, they could be kind of have to do both of those things. So I think that I don't think they'd necessarily be winning the Champions Cup or competing unbelievably well, but like that lopsided nature alone shows you how kind of farcical the structure is. To be so locked into those pool stage seedings when everyone's playing different kind of teams. Toulouse had to go on the road despite coming second to a team they didn't face. So just one thing, I wanted to defend the English clubs slightly because I think before a ball is kicked, they're kind of starting a bit back from the rest.
Yeah, no, it's a fair point. I hadn't considered that. So the format is changing next year?
There's talks of it. Like the issue is that they've lost the weekend, and that's mainly down to the French and the top 14. So I don't know necessarily if they'll get that weekend back. It's probably unlikely, but I think we might see a bit of a change. If not next season, then maybe the next.
Okay. Well, let's appreciate the good aspects. Bordeaux Munster on Saturday. It's interesting. Against La Rochelle, the bookies sort of had it like a 6-point game in La Rochelle's favour. They have Bordeaux as 11-point favourites. Bordeaux fresh from beating Ulster. Munster, as we know, fresh from beating La Rochelle. So last year, Bordeaux came unstuck in that crazy game, the 83-point thriller against Harlequins. Last season's top 14 final was their first. They're currently second in the top 14. They're top seeds in the Champions Cup, and they look a little bit scary. The good news for Munster, one, Alex Nankivell has won his appeal against two-match ban, so he'll be in. Bad news, Jeremy Loughman's hamstring is going to rule him out. Joey Carberry, that affair has been brought to a satisfactory end, 2-year deal. He was not on a national contract, he was on a player of interest contract whereby IRFU pay some money and Munster pay some money. He remains on a player of interest contract. That doesn't really roll off the tongue. So he's 25 years of age. This takes him to 2027 and to 27 years of age, at which point I presume he's in his peak and it's right. I want my RFU contract in 2 years' time, and that's that. So we'll see how it all plays out. But it's settled. He's staying at Munster. I never really thought he was going to go.
No, I agree. Like Jack Crowley, it's funny. I wonder, did he sign it before last weekend? I hope he had held off, and then he was like, actually, can we maybe have an addendum, maybe up the offer here? Because he was so good. But yeah, there was a sense that I just find it hard to see any player in our international reckoning leaving now. Simon Zebo was the only guy who realistically was in and around the 23 who's left since Donny Sexton. Like Dunick Orion when he left, I guess was, but it was kind of a bit different. He wasn't getting a contract. He was kind of towards the end of his career. It's hard to see guys turning down. Our review seem to be in a very strong bargaining position at the moment with that international jersey. I'm actually surprised more people don't leave. Like I don't think, is that playing for Ireland that good, or the possibility of playing for Ireland that you turn down like double your salary playing in a different league? The Leicester example maybe isn't the best one because they're not going great guns, but there's been other opportunities for guys to play for really strong teams and they turned it down.
Yeah. By the way, forgive me, I said Joey Carberry, which is a weird Freudian thing. Jack Crowley. I think the appeal of playing for Ireland is huge. I do. I think it's career defining. I think it's just the highest kind of arena at which you can play. It's what people really remember you for. If you know, it's just so big. Yeah, I think it's huge to sacrifice Ireland. In monetary terms, I don't know what value you put on it, but like several $100K a year, I'd say, for some of these guys. And then, to be fair, Ian Madigan explained it very well the other week. By staying at home with the taxation benefits and other sponsorships that you get, because you know, Jack Crowley will get bigger sponsorship being an Irish out half than he will playing for Leicester. You know, he just will. So the gap isn't as big as double your money. And so I think if you're talking 150, 200 grand a year, which is a colossal amount of money, of course, I think they figure I'm already doing pretty well. Ireland is so big.
I think the figures that that I've certainly heard and reported is a bit more than 100 to 150 grand. Like
no. I'm saying.
Oh, to earn it back here. Sorry. Yeah. I get you. Yeah.
Ian took us through what it's worth in terms of the tax you pay, in terms of the extra sponsorship. So,
but if the figures that are kind of bandied about are true, then Jack Crowley was talking about around doubling his base salary, which is significant. And I think he was dead right to take his time over the decision rather than signing the contract that was put in front of him, I think even before the Six Nations. So look, he would have used it as a bargaining chip, but that's the name of the game.
And say he went, is he just not being picked?
Yeah, that was my understanding, that Andy Farrell had a conversation with Jack Crowley around the time where this came out, and he made it clear that the IRFU's rules were the rules. And I think David Humphreys touched on this in his briefing in Portugal as well, that he's relaxed certain things maybe that his predecessor David Nucifora had in place, but that they weren't going to pick players who were playing abroad. It's my understanding that Farrell made that clear to Jack Crowley.
And what if a Johnny Sexton-esque player went and played abroad, just not picked?
Is there another Johnny Sexton-esque player? I don't think there is.
I don't think even if Caelan Doris went abroad, they would pick him. I think it was specific to Johnny Sexton and the massive drop-off between Johnny Sexton and the replacement, and the fact that they would have such a pivotal position. I don't think it's applicable anywhere else.
It is by a distance their best weapon in terms of keeping the salaries down.
Mm-hmm.
And my point wasn't Jack Crowley specific. It was more like guys below that.
Look at Joey Carberry.
Yeah.
You know, it's a good example.
Like Joey Carberry could easily be like, I'm staying at Munster to fight for my Ireland career, which was dead in the water.
Yeah. No, I think if you're not close, if you're not routinely in match day 23, then I think you have a much tougher conversation, you know? Because you have to really back yourself then and say, God, I've two lads ahead of me before I'm in the match day 23, or I can double my money. Then it's tricky.
And even with that, not many people are going.
Yeah, like Calvin Nash could be an interesting one. Say, you know, lighten it up on European level, might get a nice offer and might look at the way things have gone on. He's close, but there's a real sense they're not sure about him. To be fair, he did get in Six Nations. Who's another rung down from Nash?
Someone like a Max Deegan.
Max Deegan.
You know, shoots the lights out in South Africa, captain in Leinster, captain Ireland A. Isn't really part of their first choice 23. I know he was on the bench last week, but he's had offers to go to Ulster. He's stayed and fought. And I think you've hit on a good point, Will, that there's a lot of guys on the next rung down who I think perhaps should at times show a little bit more ambition and do what Joey Carberry did by going to somewhere like a Bordeaux for 2 years. And Joey Carberry will only be 30 by the time.
Why is ambition the word there? Why is it?
That's not the word I would use.
Why is it a lack of ambition?
Because I think there's a certain cohort. I'll use Leinster for an example because their squad is so big. I think there's a lot of guys there who need probably 2 injuries to go in their favour to get into Leinster's first choice match day 23. And I think over the years there's probably been too many guys who were just happy to be a Leinster player where they could have kicked on to be, you know, a better player. Now I know there's examples you could use of guys going to Ulster and it hasn't worked out, but I'm talking about going abroad to experience something new. Like I said, Carberry is a good example because he's fresh in our head, but he'll be 30 when his contract finishes with Bordeaux. He might extend his stay. He's already opened the door to possibly going to England. He's English qualified, but he could come back to Ireland as well, an even better player, you know, and he's still relatively in the peak of his career.
And even the Simon Zebo example, like people I feel like look at that and say, oh, what a disaster. He left Ireland and he never played for Ireland again. But like he was basically man of the match in a Champions Cup final against Exeter. They were a kick of a ball away from winning the Champions Cup for the first time. He played unbelievably well. Like he had a good career in wrestling and played in some big games and played arguably his best rugby, you could argue. You know, he didn't maybe look the fittest, but he was playing great rugby. Like I think that did work out for him. He earned good money, he played well and was a whisker away from winning the biggest prize in club rugby, which he wouldn't have won in Munster.
Yeah, but I do think your initial point is right, that a lot of people would look at Zebo's move and say, that was the end of that. You know, they see it as a...
And look, and that's not wrong either. Like, I'm just, as someone who enjoys European rugby, I just would think that some of the guys might be intrigued to have that moment, to get to a Champions Cup final with a Racing at Claremont in their heyday, but it doesn't seem to be something that piques people's interest in a degree that I'm
especially going somewhere like France. You got to experience La Rochelle. Like, I've been lucky enough to be at plenty of clubs. Like rugby we'll just use France as an example, we think it's big here. It's crazy big in France. Like, there's a lot to be said for going to experience that.
To this game then, I presume, I mean, it's hard to judge these things. I presume the mass exodus to La Rochelle, just given that it's a week on, can't be repeated, surely.
Well, ask Will. He was leading the charge for the Red Army last week.
Dad's still going back again.
Yeah, well,
that's one fan. That's one fan who's staying on.
I've been trying to get a handle on it, but Munster genuinely have no idea. Like, tickets went on sale during the week, public sale to Bordeaux. I don't think there's any problem, obviously, getting tickets. My understanding is that Bordeaux fully expect this to be sold out, obviously, mostly from their side of things. But I think you'll still. What did they estimated that over 3,000 people were there last week. Sorry, Munster fans.
I think
reckon more.
Yeah, I think I didn't count them, but like it certainly felt like maybe 4.
Like, if they got 1,500, 2,000, which is probably at the upper end of the scale, they'd be doing remarkably well. And this is Munster we're talking about. They always find a way.
Is Mick Galway going? Obviously,
100%.
We'll know I'll let you know if the party has started, if Mick Galway is up in a cherry picker again, leading the charge. But I wouldn't be surprised, Joe, at all to see like massive Munster support over there again. Ian Costello said it, there'd be piggy banks broken to make this happen.
Okay. So as I mentioned, 11 points is how the bookies kind of see it. It was 6 points La Rochelle. So this feels like a tougher ask for Munster. Dennis Leamy talking about the game, he said Bordeaux play a little bit more chaotically than La Rochelle. They throw the ball around a bit more. They've got Penau and they've got Bill Biarri, although he called him Billy Barry, which is what they've been calling him in training all week. Like even those two alone, and it's not those two alone for Bordeaux, obviously. Bill Biarri has, in his last 22 games, 26 tries at 21 years of age. Like, rich vein of form doesn't really cover it. And then Damien Penau, he's scored 11 tries this European season, so he's already equalled Chris Ashton's single season record. And if you take his last 18 matches for Bordeaux in France, he has scored 20 tries. That alone is a massive problem in this game. And there are many other problems in this game for Munster. Yeah,
the back three is probably the place to start. And actually, one guy you didn't mention there, Roman Burras at the fullback, I think is so underrated. France have a lot of good fullbacks, so he's a bit unlucky in that regard. But Munster expecting him to have maybe 5 changes this weekend. Matthew Jalibert coming back in at 10, who he didn't have the greatest cameo, I have to admit, off the bench against Ulster last weekend, but he is Bordeaux's golden boy. I would expect him to start with Joey Carberry, probably drop him to the bench. Van Rensburg, I'd imagine, would come back in at 12 with Mo Fana at 13. And Mo Fana was, I know his teammate got the Six Nations Player of the Year, but Billy Barry, as Munster called him. But Mo Fana for my mind, was one of the best players in the Six Nations and probably hit a level that I hadn't realised that he had in him. He was outstanding.
Definitely, because if you look back to the Marseille game the previous year, he started on the wing.
And the wing, yeah. Bit of Jamie Osborne vibes.
Yeah, he kind of stuck out like a sore thumb in that French backline. Initially, you're kind of thinking, God, they must see something in it that maybe he hasn't justified in his performance levels. But I agree, I thought he was unbelievable, especially in that game against Scotland, which for a while was in the melting pot. I thought he really stood up. So he's a guy who probably doesn't get as much, kind of love as some of the other fellas in the back line, but he's a quality player. A very interesting backstory as well. I think he comes from one of the Polynesian islands as well. That's where he was born, so obviously came through that route. But yeah, like you mentioned, like those two guys are the two best wings in Europe, possibly the world at the moment.
Springboks would probably have something to say, Colby and
close, but and they're playing the same club team, so what are we looking at? Maybe Sean O'Brien going back to the wing this weekend?
I'm not sure, actually. That's the big thing, obviously, because Nankivell will come back in at 12. I thought Andrew Smith was excellent for Munster. I know he had the yellow card, but I thought he was excellent. Like, what a story that is. A guy who was deemed surplus to requirements by Connacht and has now found himself in the Champions Cup quarter-final. But the battle of those back threes, I think, is going to be fascinating, because Munster's back three had a whole new dynamic to it last weekend against La Rochelle with Takir Abrahams at fullback. Now, thankfully, he's going to be fit as well. He only suffered cramp. When he went down initially, I thought he had done his hamstring for ages.
That pace, which is in short supply across the board in Irish rugby, it transforms so many aspects of what the opposition are dealing with. I mean, the attention you have to give to Abrahams, what that means for Nash, the options that, Abrahams can take as a team, because they were really under the cosh when Abrahams created the try. I mean, that is completely swinging the momentum, and it's not like clever, it's not sophisticated, it's just raw pace.
Yeah, and this is like the big thing we've been talking about in terms of an Irish context at the moment on the back of the Six Nations, that speed kills. And I was watching it back because Abrahams was up for media duty on Tuesday. We have a piece with him tomorrow, but I was watching it back because he was talking about what went through his head when he scored the try, and just his identification of Bottia in the line there and going past him. And if anyone wants to watch it back, watch how far ahead of the play Craig Casey is, because they're retreating. If you remember, it was a really poor kick by Dylan Lades. Kick chase was really poor as well by La Rochelle. But Craig Casey actually stays upfield, and he was saying in his interview after the match that he had said to Abrahams during the week that if that scenario happens, I'm just going to gamble and take a chance that you're going to get through. Yeah. And it happened. It was an incredible try, but that's what I mean, Joe. It changes the whole dynamic of what Munster are capable of. And when Munster identified Abrahams, he was a little bit off the radar. He was playing with Leon, was kind of struggling to get his game, but was playing a lot at fullback. But he came in as a winger. He had a tough time. His baby daughter couldn't get a passport over in France. They had to move to Ireland. He moved without them at the start. He then picked up an injury. He was out for a while. He was injured in the Cast game, a really bad shoulder injury. So he's just back after 4 months. And I thought it was a brave call to put him in at fullback, because he hadn't played at fullback for Munster before. So look, I've been really impressed with him. I don't think La Rochelle really tested him in terms of aerially his kicking game. So I think he probably has a couple of more strings to prove, but I really like the look of that back three, and Calvin Nash was immense last weekend.
Will that be Nash versus Penau?
It will be Nash versus Billy Barry.
Billy Barry's left.
And yeah.
Nash right.
Yeah.
And then Pennow versus whoever they pick.
Yeah, it'll be Andrew Smith or Sean O'Brien.
How do you feel about Billy Barry against Nash?
I don't feel good about Billy Barry against anyone.
No, I know.
Yeah.
I know. But that's a foot race I don't love.
Well, yeah, Will's right. He'd beat anyone.
It's true.
In a foot
Okay.
race. But you look at the try he scored against Ireland when he kicked it over the top. That's going to become his specialty, and that's something that Munster are going to have to be really mindful of. The ball. It's a bit like Jacob Stockdale in 2018. The bounce of the ball just seems to be going his way. And I think just on that Craig Casey try, there's a real lesson in that for Munster. I think this weekend, because if they kick loosely to this back three, which we just highlighted, they will punish you. Ulster did it a couple of times. You look at Pennow's break, Joey Carberry's break from deep as well. So the kicking game, I think, is going to be absolutely crucial.
Yeah, Dennis Leamy referenced that, and it's similar to what Mike Prendergast was talking about in advance of the La Rochelle game, in that Leamy was saying something similar to Prendergast. The big focus for us is slowing down their ball and then trying to create a good defensive line.
You look at Bordeaux's scoring average, they are going to score tries this weekend. I think as good as Munster's defence, if it holds up as well as it did last weekend, that was the thing, they scrambled so well against La Rochelle. So you'd imagine that Bordeaux will probably score 2, if not 3 tries at least. So Munster, Bordeaux tends to play in bursts, and I think this is maybe the point that you're getting at as well, Joe. They tend to play in bursts, and in the blink of an eye, like Ulster found last week, can be 21-0 down, and all of a sudden...
Ian was saying on Monday, they often don't dominate possession.
No, they don't, because they'll
take your mistake and they'll pounce.
And like Noel McNamara, former Ireland under-20s coach, is coaching them, and you'd be foolish not to think though that there is structure within that attack. It's not just all off the cuff. So Munster have to live with their purple patches, because you look at what happened last week against Ulster. They have a tendency, Bordeaux, to switch off, and when they did, Ulster really took advantage. So I think it's all about Munster kind of hanging in, and there'll be a few ropey moments, but Munster will be far better, I think, defensively than Ulster were. And I think they'll also be far better around the ruck and the breakdown, trying to slow their ball down. Maxime Lucu is in a really rich vein of form at the moment, played brilliant for France in Dupont's absence. So it's all about getting after him, and I think Munster are well equipped to do that. The big issue is, sorry, I'll let you come in then, Will, is like when we were down in the press conference last week, Jean Klein was using words like, we're going to have to go to dark places, we're going to have to go to the well against La Rochelle, and Munster did that, and they did it brilliantly. And I was asking Dennis Leamy this earlier this week, has the well run dry? I mean, can you really, it's emotionally more than physically.
Well, I think that is ultimately, that's the reason it's 11 points and not 6. I just think for Munster to replicate what they did 7 days later, 2 travel days thrown in, the emotion, I find it's now. I know they're pointing to their South African sojourn when they won the URC, and that we're more in that headspace. But I think it's such an ask.
Yeah, what would give me slight unease, if you look back to say 2022, Toulouse Munster penalty shootout, Toulouse win. What a lift! They have to go back to Dublin again the following week and play Leinster. Somewhat similar travel circumstances, and they were completely on empty and got absolutely hockeyed. Now Leinster then are not Bordeaux now necessarily, but that will be a slight concern. But then you could flip it around and say, like, has there ever been a more life-affirming victory for a team than last weekend? Like it could have the opposite effect as well. Like the prospect of going back on the road again and interacting with the fans again could just be exactly what they need. Potentially, if this was a home game against Bordeaux, perversely, that actually could make it slightly.
Look at what they did in 2023 by winning the URC. They went on the road and beat Glasgow, they beat Leinster, had changed their team, and they went to South Africa and won the final. So I think that's been a big reference point this week, that they know they have it within them to do it.
And just one thing, because obviously we're focusing a lot on the back lines there, like one guy I'm massively keen to see this weekend again is Josh Wycherley. Like, he obviously played, 72 minutes or 68 minutes last week against La Rochelle, against Weenie Atonio. Could be going against Ben Tafafanua this week. They're probably the 2 heaviest props in world rugby. And it's funny, you wouldn't, if I say Josh Wycherley to you, you might not necessarily think of him as a guy who's been a cornerstone of some of Munster's great days. That 22-all draw, he started that game and held his own against Toulouse when they beat Clermont on the road during COVID, a game which now feels a lifetime ago. But Clermont were Clermont then. He held up again, started that game too. So he's a guy who's not very heralded, but he could have a huge role to play. If he can hold up the scrum at least, that's the starting point, because that was a key part of last weekend.
I'm very glad you said this, because I actually sat down with Josh Richardy one-on-one this week, and you pretty much have my intro in your head.
Yeah.
He is facing...
The underrated man.
He's facing the world's two heaviest tight heads back-to-back weeks. Like, it's insane when you think about it, when he played Antonio last week and Taufenua this week. So I'm glad you mentioned that, Will.
But it is an underrated part of what they did last week. Like, getting a bit of parity and only conceding one scrum penalty. Like, the rest of the game can't really happen without that kind of...
unsung hero, you're right.
Yeah, fair point. Tadhg Beirne was asked, by the way, about the extra responsibility of captaincy or what it means on the pitch. And he did. I'm glad he said this, because this was my experience watching the game on TV. So he's asked about being captain and how that changed his role on the day last week into this week. He said, to be honest, the captaincy is kind of irrelevant because they won't talk to me. I tried a few times and that's Andrea Pirardi, just said no. I literally had no dealings with them other than just him making decisions. I think that's the way it went. Completely. Mm-hmm. Like, there's a few times where Irish players, Doris in the Six Nations, I thought was spoken to a little... almost passive-aggressively. We had at La Rochelle the referee refusing to deal with Gary Ringrose. Or was it James Ryan?
Yeah.
Deal with Gary.
Yeah.
But regardless, I think the referees are a bit like, go away. Because Tadhg Beirne did not come at him like... So you don't necessarily hear everything off mic, but it didn't feel like, on fairness, Tadhg, you're pushing it now. That's the fourth time in 20 minutes you're in his face. Felt he was respectful, but there was just an immediate no, well, you can clear off.
Yeah, I find it strange, because you're right. There's been a pattern. Like, is it a case of like Johnny Sexton had so much stature in the game and was such an aggressive character that like referees felt compelled to give him a hearing, whereas everyone else, they're just like, oh,
harsh on Johnny Sexton, I think.
Well, no, look, I'm not saying anything new there, but like, it's like for Caelan Doris, James Ryan, Tadhg Beirne, like, they're all very different characters. Gary, like, for them all to be kind of dismissed in the relatively recent past by very different referees as well, like one English referee, one Italian referee. I think it's Nika Amashakeli refereeing this weekend. Who's wouldn't be the biggest chatter either. I don't think, like the end game in Leinster, La Rochelle, just gone. The one recently in the pool stage, he was pretty curt with guys when it was kind of flack flying similarly to last weekend. So it's a strange kind of phenomenon that's developed.
I think that the likes of Tadhg Beirne and others, they're never going to get a yellow card from a referee. I think they actually need to start experimenting with getting a bit more in their face. No, I won't go away. Kind of thing. Well, like, what's this? All this respect. So he's like, no, you don't talk to me. He said, well, hang on a second, I will talk to you. Now, you run the risk, obviously, of him turning against the team at large and decisions going against you, and that'd be the received wisdom. But I thought Beirne on Saturday was within his rights to go, no, sorry, I actually do have a point to make. I'm going to make it. But there's this like, oh, okay, sorry, sir.
Yeah.
I don't think Sexton would have necessarily said... Oh, yeah, no, sorry. I think Sexton would have said, well, hang on a second.
Well, he said it before, I'm the captain, you have to talk to me. You might not like me, but you have to talk to me. That's why he was on the ref mic saying that.
But it is a skill. Like, we were never really talking about this when Paul O'Connell, Brian Driscoll, Rory Best was a certain extent. I think it is a real skill when you're in the heat of battle and you're like a Tadhg Beirne, you're in mauls, you're in rucks, you're taking your head up to kind of have that calm demeanour. And Beirne was sin-binned against Connacht by Craig Evans for an alleged infringement on the Munster line, and I think he was pretty furious with that as well, but he actually bit his tongue because he was talking to us about that afterwards. So,
sorry, when I say he won't be yellow carded, I don't mean in a Richie McCaw can do what he wants at the breakdown way.
Yeah.
I mean in a going, hang on, I am going to talk to you way. A ref's not going to go, how dare you talk to me and yellow card him.
Roman Poit gave Paul O'Connell a yellow card for that exact thing in 2010 against Perpignan. I haven't seen it since though, so I feel like 15 years.
Such a big call to do.
15 years is long enough. I think that you can definitely go for it.
But do you then, would you agree that look, you run the risk of we won't get a decision off this guy for the next half hour? Where are you in that camp?
Yeah, I would be on that side because, like, on the Thursday or Wednesday before every game, coaches are able to send different things into the ref and they get feedback in terms of, what the ref wants to see in terms of pictures, whether it's the breakdown, whether it's the scrum. And Tadhg Beirne, as Munster captain, will talk to Amish Cavelli at the weekend before the game as well. So there is a chance to build up that rapport. This is something that Caelan Doris was speaking about after the France game. That and it's escaped me. Do you know who the ref was in the Ireland-France game, Six Nations? That he told him before the game that I don't want you coming at me for every decision. But
it was Angus Gardner.
Angus Gardner, that's it. But there were times where Caelan Doris, as captain, he's getting messages down from the coaching box. So it was his duty to go forward. So it's that real fine balance. And look, Caelan Doris, I think, is still getting to grips. It's probably why Maro Toje is being probably more tipped as the Lions captain at the moment.
Well, I felt Beirne from minute one Andrea Perardi was like, how dare you talk to me? So I don't know, whatever rapport can be built during the week might be a good thing. Sending flowers, chocolates, how are the kids, all that kind of stuff. So we'll keep an eye on that. What are we, anything else you want to touch on before we kind of lean towards predictions?
Like, I don't think this Bordeaux, like I said, the team have a tendency to switch off. I don't think they have a very strong pack, but I don't think it's, a pack that Munster should be fearful of. And that, to me, was the big positive, Joe, last weekend, was that on paper, you would have looked at that Munster pack and the La Rochelle pack and thought, okay, this is where Munster are going to struggle. And your example, Will, of Josh Wycherley is a great shout. Like, they just went toe to toe with one of the biggest packs in Europe. So that would give me confidence that they can do the same against this Bordeaux pack, who I don't think are as good. Their captain and veteran Lucette Jefferson Poirot went off injured at halftime last weekend. I don't know if he's going to be fit, so that could be something that Munster are going away. But ultimately, like, if it's at scrum time, they just want parity there. I don't think Munster are going to go over there and think they're going to, overpower Bordeaux. But if they can get parity, I think that would give them a real platform. I think 11 points seems a bit big, if I'm being honest, in terms of a margin.
And just if it is close in the second half, Bordeaux still haven't won anything. They still haven't really proven themselves to be at the top table. Everyone is assuming they deserve to be there with the quality they have, but they still will have a bit to prove. Like that Quins game, like, look at what's happened to Harlequins since. Like, to lose that at home and concede 42 points is bananas. Like, so for me, they still have a lot to prove. And this weekend, even if they win, they'll still have to have tougher tests to come. But I don't think it's a given they'll win. I do think with the attacking threats they have out wide, I could see a scenario where they run riot early and it gets out of hand. But I could also see a scenario where that doesn't happen and they get tight and the home crowd get edgy and they get turned over again.
Okay. That's 3 o'clock Saturday. I mean, it's going to be great again. And then on the Friday, Leinster are firm favourites against Glasgow, hoping to attract 30,000-ish at the Aviva. It's a good effort for 6 days, 4 days.
Yep.
From Monday they went on sale.
I think the upper tier will be closed, but if they got anywhere near 30, I think it would be remarkable.
It is this tournament shooting itself in the foot again.
Oh, absolutely. Like, as you said, Ian Madigan said it, that the quarterfinal should be the best weekend of the year.
And if they had 2 weeks, they'd probably get much closer to the 50.
Absolutely. Like, even getting 55 in Croke Park last week, I know they had a bigger run and was a fair achievement as well.
Yeah. So 6 changes and a positional switch from Leo Cullen. Tommy O'Brien replaces Jamie Osborne on the right wing. They have a completely new front row. Cian Healy starts. Ronan Kelleher is fit. We saw him jogging around Croke Park last week, so his neck injury is behind him. And Tyke Furlong, in you come. We have Joe McCarthy and R.G. Snyman. Max Deegan, rewarded for his form of late, is in at 6. Van der Fleer 7. Jack Conan gets the nod at 8. Gibson Park, Prendergast, and then Lowe is on the other wing. Tommy O'Brien, like I said, is in. Geordie Barrett starts alongside Gary Ringrose, Hugo Keenan at 15. So, I mean, the bench is obscene, really. Sheehan, Porter, Slimani. It's ridiculous. Ryan Baird is out. Diarmuid Mangan would make his European debut off the bench. Caelan Doris is on the bench. Luke McGrath, Ross Byrne on the bench. And Robbie Henshaw would make his 100th Leinster appearance if he comes on, which I'm sure he will, from the bench. I've only hardened in what we kind of posited on Monday with Ian and Rory. Leinster will win this competition. They are just so fun. They're just so much better than everything around. Look at it. This is obscene.
Yeah, what year was that sentence being uttered? Like, you could have said that the last 3 years.
Oh, no. The last number of years, Saracens always really worried me. To be honest, and you're making a face saying no. I always thought Saracens were a massive problem for Leinster. And then La Rochelle were lurking. Like, when you take Dupont out of Toulouse, I just think it's clear to me now this year, allied to how much steel they're playing with, like the Nienaber defence. It's not just names on a page. It's the style they're playing with now. It's so much more kind of resolute and resilient. They can take anything you want to throw at them in a way I'm not sure they could have other years. So, it's this year more than other years. I'm putting it out there. I've never been, not since 2011-12 territory, been as sure this far out that they're going to win.
I'm not
Discuss.
so sure. Yeah, no, I
agree with you, but I would have been pretty confident in the other years. But there's, as you say, there's marked differences this year. They signed R.G. Snyman, they signed Geordie Barrett, they signed Rabbi Slimani, even Sam Prendergast. That's a new wrinkle. Like, Ross Byrne started the previous 2 Champions Cup finals. Like, people obviously will debate Sam Prendergast's international credentials and how he's performing at the moment, but he's a new guy and he is getting them humming, a fair bit when he's been selected. Like, we are seeing Nienaber's influence massively marked this year versus last year. Like, last year he came in after the World Cup. I think he only had like 1 weekend before they went to La Rochelle for the first pool game, so it was very much learning on the job. This year they've had a lot of time to bed it in and it shows. Like, for all we kind of took the piss out of Quins during the week, like they still have a lot of attacking firepower. Like, you know, week on week they score a lot of points, and Leinster didn't concede a single one to them. So that defence is getting even hardened. They have a relatively easier side of the draw to the other teams. So it is lined up for them, but it will come down potentially to a one knockout game again when they'll get the best of the French, whoever comes out of that side, potentially. And for me, it's still a mental thing. Mm-hmm. Like, I agree with all the things you said, but for me, it'll come down to, can they deliver in the big moments? They haven't in any of the other finals.
Yeah. Before you take my point apart, the obvious caveat, it's sport, anything can happen. It's knockout rugby, of course, but like, we're here to just speculate and give our opinion and our thoughts. Mm-hmm. So it's on those terms. I wouldn't put my mortgage on it. But if you're putting a gun to my head, I've never been as sure.
Yeah,
Or put it this way: what other year in the last 7 or 8?
They played a final at home.
Played a final at home.
Played a final at home.
Did La Rochelle not scare the bejesus out of you coming to Dublin?
But it was still a home game where Leinster rarely lose at the Aviva.
Geez, I went to that game I thought this is all set up.
And then they started
17-0 up after 10 minutes.
I'll admit it's 17-0. I thought they were going to win.
But that goes back to your point, which I fully agree with. It's a mental thing when it comes to Leinster, and the longer it goes on, if they haven't win, it becomes a bigger issue. Look, I know Dupont, obviously being out of the Toulouse team, is a...
We'll take the final last year, his performance in the final.
Yeah, absolutely. You know? But this Toulouse team, I think, are a golden generation team. Sure. I really do. Even without Dupont, I think they can survive, and absolutely they can go on and retain the Champions Cup.
Do you think they're the most likely?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I know people are talking about Toulon, and obviously they're playing each other this weekend, but I would still expect Toulouse. They weren't at their best last week against Sale Sharks, but they still came through it. So I still think they're the favourites for me. Leinster obviously just behind them.
You think they're the favourites? Yeah, right.
I think Toulouse would be, yeah.
No, I still think Leinster are the favourites. But could you even trust them to pick the right team in the final? Like, you look at last year, they started with Josh van der Vlier on the bench, and they started with James Ryan on the bench, because of South African style of, we need our good guys coming off the bench.
There's a danger they could Pep Guardiola style for a few years in Champions League overthink it. Yeah.
Well,
it's already happened.
Overthink it again. Yeah.
But what about the team for Friday? Like, are we going to talk about why is Dan Sheehan, Andrew Porter, Caelan Doris on the bench for a knockout game? I know Glasgow are missing a lot of key players, but Leinster pretty much have top spot in the URC sewn up. I know it's not quite as drastic as the URC semi-final a few years ago in Munster, but if I'm a Leinster fan, I want to see all the big guns playing this weekend, particularly in the pack, where this is a bit of an Ireland-Scotland game. Where do Ireland always go after Scotland? It's up front in the pack. If that's me and I'm Leo Cullen, Jack Nienaber, I'm doubling down on that. I'm picking my best team. These guys aren't going to play, you'd imagine, for the next couple of weeks, like I said, in the URC. So I have to admit, I'm surprised to see those guys on the bench.
It's fair. I brushed by that a little quickly. Are they going for a Doris, Sheehan, Porter, Slimani on you go on 42 minutes?
Well, I'm wondering if, I'm very surprised that Jack Boyle isn't involved, but is Cian Healy going to come off after 15, 20 minutes? Are they going to do this thing about Andrew Porter coming on? So that goes back to my thing about overthinking it a bit. And if, I know they're probably managing Caelan Doris a little bit. He's gotten through so much work over the last few months, but if he's fit enough to be on the bench, you'd imagine he'd be fit enough to start. So, I think Leinster will win comfortably this weekend. Glasgow are missing a lot of players as well, and maybe that played into their thinking. But like I said, I think that's their first choice backline actually on form. But up front, I'm a bit surprised that they're not gone locked and loaded.
What do you make of that?
They haven't actually picked their first choice team yet this year. So, say it gets to the final or the semi-final, maybe, if they win this weekend, they'll probably be playing with the first 15 that actually hasn't played together before across the entire year, depending on how long James Ryan is out and stuff like that. So you would prefer that bit of cohesion. Obviously, they train with each other every day, but what is their best team? Do they know their exact best team yet?
I think they do.
Is this now Barrett in for all the knockout games? You're starting, has to happen.
I think so, and I thought Henshaw was excellent last week, again with the caveat of Quins, but because the game was dead and buried, I got to player cam him for the half an hour that he was on, and we spoke about this, Joe, earlier in the season. He just does everything so well. And I don't think it's a slight on Henshaw. In my mind, Jordy Barrett is the best 12 in the world. He's only here for another couple of months. You want to get every last ounce out of him. So I'd be surprised if he doesn't play 12. I think you have to. He's a game changer.
Dynamic, because every time I watch Henshaw, I think you're just exceptionally polished and there's such a great pro at everything. Yeah. Everything. And yet you watch Barrett play and you go, oh my God, okay. Mm-hmm. Wow. So Tommy O'Brien on the wing in.
Yeah, I think it's a massive game for him and a massive couple of weeks for him. He had a great 2 weeks in South Africa when Leinster went and they won one game and narrowly beaten by the Bulls. At a time when there's a lot of questions about Irish wings and are they producing enough good players in that area. He's physical, he's quick, he's a really good tackler, but I think he has pace as well. the thing with him is he hasn't been able to stay fit. Even during the games in South Africa, both games he kind of went down clutching his lower leg, and you're worried it might be another couple of weeks out, but he got through that. I actually thought they might have brought him back a week early to start last weekend. Again, they went with Jamie Osborne on the wing, a move that I think a lot of people are still questioning. I would rather see an out-and-out winger like Tommy O'Brien play, but at a time where there's going to be a summer tour where the idea is to unearth new players with the view to November in Chicago at the start of November, I think he could be a guy who could have a massive couple of weeks and then go in the summer tour and learn from, admittedly not the Irish coaches, but it may be from some other international players who don't go on the Leinster tour, and could be in a really good place come the start of next season.
Cian, given you were at the game at Croke Park, the defence we touched on, and that that's the reason for my increasing confidence in Leinster. But obviously it was noteworthy in that they scored 10 tries. So what Jordy Barrett said afterwards about the attack is as follows. Our attack was fluid. A lot of things we'd been working on through the season from an attacking point of view shone through. The weather helps that. You're playing through November, December, January. You're trying to play a certain way, but you're handcuffed. You have to be patient. Ultimately, you bring your best stuff this time of the season. And I sort of buy that. Now, Leinster have played much better attacking rugby during November, December and January in previous seasons is the only thing that I thought, I'm not sure. But regardless, whether it wasn't quite working or whether it was weather dependent or a bit of both, did you look on Saturday and think, they're humming? Or is it too difficult to separate from the way Harlequins defended and played?
Probably more of the latter, if I'm being honest. Look, it was by far Tyler Blainall's best day in terms of running the attack for Leinster, but the amount of time, we'll say, like pick up on Sam Prendergast, the amount of time that he had on the ball, like just beggared belief at times, and he was exceptional. But because he had the freedom of Croke Park, and you mentioned Jamie Osborne playing on the wing, Harlequins started really well, but I just couldn't believe that they didn't go after Prendergast more. They didn't go after Jamie Osborne on the wing like France did. I know there's a big difference between Harlequins and France, but like that's were the two kind of weak points that they had identified and got plenty of joy out of it. So look, they scored some sensational tries. Jamie Osborne's try was brilliant. Jordy Barrett came on and sprinkled his class all over it, but I'm just not sure how much you can read into that. I was writing about this earlier this week that the week before that game, Leinster were training with sub-academy and under-20s players because the bulk of their squad were over in South Africa. And I was chatting to Robbie Henshaw about this, and he was saying they were actually tasty enough sessions. A lot of young guys looking to kind of make their mark. It was probably a tougher training session. I know it's a bit of a cliche, but genuinely it probably was, because I thought it was embarrassing, disgraceful how Harlequins threw in the towel. Like I know, like Danny Wilson, their head coach, came out afterwards and he pointed to the vast resources. That's fair enough, but their body language stank.
The Van der Fleer Mole try, I was like, I'm turning this off.
The James Lowe try.
This is an insult to me as a viewer.
James Lowe ones at the end, yeah.
I didn't see that
one. So when you take all of that into the equation, and I'm giving Leinster their praise, they were excellent. Gibson Park was brilliant, but how much will they have actually learned? And it goes back to the point, I guess, that I made, that why I still probably make Toulouse favourites is that we've seen this movie before. Leinster sailed through the knockout stages. I wouldn't be surprised if they put a decent score on Glasgow again on Friday, but what are they actually learning for when it comes to the crunch against a Toulouse, against a Bordeaux in a semi-final or most likely a final?
Yeah, look, for all my kind of bullishness and also positing the theory to get the debate going, I do accept that. Like, I don't look at Leinster and think they're unbeatable.
Yeah.
But just in comparison with other years, it's the steel that Nina Arbor has put into them. I just feel they're more built now for cup rugby matches in a final when everyone's tense. And I feel they moved away from, we need our slickness and our creativity to work like clockwork under huge pressure. And it's so much easier to disrupt in a final than it is to do that. So I just think they're built now for a dogfight in a final.
It's funny you say that, because even the manner in which they, I guess, lost last year's final, but they went to extra time, it was very different to what you usually see them play. It was like, remember their scrum performance was really good. They won a load of scrum penalties. It was 15-all. It wasn't free flowing. It was, it was kind of the hallmarks of things you're saying, and they were the width of a drop goal away from winning that. But it's funny, one thing I will say about Leinster, they haven't won the Champions Cup, but what would our lives be like, or these conversations be like if we were an English podcast with no representative in a final since 2020.
Sorry,
since
January
2020. At least we've gotten to talk deep. Like, what would we talk about these weeks? We're actually lucky, at least, that the interest has been sustained.
We're so lucky. I think that's why this tournament's dying over in England. The relative lack of success of English clubs. Because we certainly wouldn't be talking about this if the provinces weren't in it.
Yeah,
for sure.
Absolutely. And I think for Leinster, just a quick point, is it's all about the balance. If Leinster get to the final, which I fully expect they will, their defence, could possibly end up winning the game. I hope that doesn't mean, though, that they're not going to, use their attack as well and actually just back their defence and go into this kind of, defensive rearguard mode, because Leinster have far more about them.
But then look, the last one they won in 18. Look what kind of game it was. That's a final. I know it was wet.
Yeah, well, it'll be under the roof in Cardiff now this time. So,
but I just finals. Like,
yeah, no,
how many finals are shootouts?
They haven't scored a try in 2 of the last 3 finals, which is mad considering how many they run in.
Could I put it to you this way? Are Leinster a better team this year than last year?
Yes.
And the year before?
Yes.
Very good the year before.
No, I don't think
They
so.
were very good the year before.
I think they're a better team now with the 3 guys who you've mentioned, as Will has outlined. Ian Arbour's the defence system is fully embedded, and we're starting to see more now of Tyler Blaine.
If they're a better team this year, and last year they were a drop goal away from winning, and Toulouse are now without Dupont. Explain your equation.
Because I think this Toulouse team are a golden generation team. I think they've got a few
But they were
more.
last year.
They what?
They were also a golden generation.
Yeah, but I still think they are, even without Dupont. I think they're good enough to retain their Champions Cup. I think that this
Leinster are better.
Leinster are better than what they were, but I still think Toulouse, yeah.
But the gap's closed by half a point.
It is, but I still think that Toulouse without Dupont are an exceptional team. You look at all the firepower that they have. So I know the point you're getting at. And look, it is fine margins, but if I was a betting man, I would still say probably Toulouse.
Yeah. No, listen.
But I accept your point.
And Joe, to your point, if Leinster go to this final, if they get there and play that style of rugby you outlined and win, that's not going to make me say, oh, well, like they should have been playing that the whole time and that's what they needed to do to win. I'll go back and say, like, the way they played under Stuart Lancaster and the rugby they played was 100% good enough, and it was all within their control to win. So I hope that's not. I hope people don't say that, oh, this is how you have to play to win a Champions Cup final if they do go on and win it with this style. Because for me, the way they played under Lancaster was better to watch, was extremely effective, and should have yielded 2 Champions Cups in those 2 finals. It just didn't, because they didn't deliver on the day and botched some key moments. But for me, that style of play was 100% more enjoyable to watch, and that's what I preferred.
Yeah, I mean deliberately obtuse with my. But if Toulouse are,
I know. But by the way, I'm accepting that they are very fine margins, and it would not surprise me at all. I think we are going to get the final that probably everyone's expecting, Toulouse and Leinster again. And when it comes down to it, I agree with Will. I just think there's something mental in the back of their minds, and if they get over it, then they could go on to Leinster and win another 2 or 3. It's that kind of fine balance,
Yeah. Well, I think actually that's why the Nienaber move, aside from toughening up defensively, is such a good one, because it does imbue them with a sense of belief. We can trust this guy. He's done it with South Africa twice. Like that psychological hurdle, it'll give them a great safety net almost in the face of the pressure of a cup final to be like, just do what Jack says, and there'll be a great comfort for them in that.
Absolutely.
It didn't work last year. Like how fine were those margins? That's what I would have said. The exact same thing you just outlined. Oh, like the intangibles that he brings from 3 1-point wins and the knockouts in a row in the World Cup, never been done before. And yet then it wasn't a melting pot. They had a chance and they weren't able to take it.
True. I just feel now that this feels like the first season of this is Nienaber's Leinster now.
Just a quick point. I know we've mentioned Slimani, Snyman and Barrett, but I've had the chance to sit down with Snyman and Slimani over the last couple of weeks, one-on-one, which is rare that you get. And just listening to them talk, like obviously pound for pound in their positions, they're exceptional players, but it's actually, I think, what they're bringing off the pitch as well in terms of, helping the younger players. Slimani was telling me how he's basically working with the young Leinster props to teach them about the French mindset around the scrum. Like, that's invaluable. RG Snyman talking about working with Alan Spicer, a young Leinster guy coming through, giant guy, like all these things, and they're born winners as well. Geordie Barrett working with Jamie Osborne. So while they're brilliant on the pitch, I think when you add in their influence off the pitch as well, it would kind of give me more optimism that could be Leinster's year. So I think it's worth highlighting, I think, the impact of the NIQs, because Leinster's at the moment are exceptional. I mentioned Takir Abrahams for Munster last week as well. They've been brilliant.
Yeah. Snyman also bringing his perfect injury record to Leinster.
Well, of course,
he'll never be injured again.
A lot of people said that to me over the weekend in La Rochelle.
Did they?
Oh, Snyman, and the second he leaves, never another injury.
Okay, anything else for Friday we need to mention? Leinster generally?
Yeah, Tommy O'Brien, I'm really looking forward to seeing. Like I said, I think this is Leinster's best backline on form at the moment. I think it has a really good balance to it. Tommy O'Brien is electric. I think he was a sprinter or a hurdler when he was younger. His just body hasn't played ball, and I think he could have a really bright future ahead of him for Ireland if he can stay fit. Okay.
Connacht Racing, 8 o'clock, the Dexcom Stadium. They beat Cardiff by 15 obviously last week, so it's Racing coming to town. There's a stink of glamour off this. Friday or Saturday?
Saturday night, yeah.
8 o'clock.
Yeah.
Okay. Well,
be curious to see. A lot of people might have listened to this podcast by the time the teams are named. What kind of team are Racing going to send over is the big question. Owen Farrell obviously played last week. Racing have had a really tough season. Obviously Stuart Lancaster has left now. Patrick Calazzo has come in and kind of steadied the ship, but will Racing have one eye on the top 14? I'd say there's a very good chance they will, whereas the Challenge Cup Connacht are all in now, and like what a story it would be if they could go all the way, because I think it is starting to open up. Their seeding means that they'd be at home in a potential semi-final as well. I saw Rory O'Connor had a story that they're potentially looking at moving that to Pearse Stadium on the back of McHale Park being such a success story. So
is that one of those semi-finals that they can't play at the Dexcom?
No, they could. It would only be 6,000.
Yeah.
Okay, but it's not like a home country neutral venue.
No, and on that point, Leinster have designated the Aviva, which is a little bit surprised if they were to win. I would assume they would have went back to Croke Park, which they sold out for their semi-final against Northampton last year. Just as
championship on.
I'm not sure. I'm not the man to be asking that, but
I think so.
I was a little bit surprised because it's looking like it'll be a repeat Leinster Northampton, and they sold it out last year. But for Connacht, like there's so much going on at Connacht at the moment, and I think they've done pretty well to kind of steady the ship through these choppy waters. Pete Wilkins is still absent on sick leave. Cully Tucker has come in and, like I said, steadied the ship. They've announced that Billy Millard is coming in a new role next season. The stadium is being redeveloped. So there is really good things happening at Connacht, and it obviously helps when you can have Bundy Aki, Mac Hansen and Philly Beelum back available. So their URC kind of challenge, it looks like it's dwindling a bit, particularly after that loss to Munster a couple of weeks ago. So what a story it would be if Connacht could get to the final. You could have Connacht in a potential Challenge Cup final the Friday night in Cardiff with potentially Munster and Leinster, who knows, to come the following day. What a weekend that
and
would
it's
be.
important to get into the Champions Cup for them. They probably won't get through the lead. They have 2 games in South Africa still to come, and with this Dexcom Stadium being redeveloped, like having a couple of big fixtures to sell next week or next year will be huge.
Yeah. Any great idea what's going on with their defence over the last number of weeks, months?
Well, that's the eternal question for Connacht, and it sounds like Scott Fardy, the defence coach, is out the door at the end of the season, which probably tells you everything you need to know about how it just hasn't worked out. And Connacht have been very loose. Like that would make me fearful about them going all the way. Then we've just literally, praised Leinster's defence. That is ultimately what will win you the cups at the end of the day. But it's been a constant theme throughout this season and last season. So,
like, I heard Bernard Jackman talking about, like, you can see a difference in the just sheer work rate, body language with the ball versus without the ball. Like, this isn't a systems necessarily or intricacies not kind of clicking. This is almost like a hunger thing, and I find that very surprising.
Yeah, absolutely. And like Pete Wilkins would have been the defence coach, and he did a pretty good job as defence coach. So I don't know whether there are too many cooks in terms of like different messaging coming through, because we're still waiting to find out what the actual coaching structure is going to be next season. There was talk that Pete Wilkins might go back and be the head coach still, but focus more on defence. But on that sort of body language, think back to Craig Casey's try at McHale Park when Calvin Nash runs through Santi Cordero, and I've just praised the NIQ signings in terms of Munster and Leinster, but Connacht have got very little out of Cordero, if we're being honest. Now, he had a really bad injury last season, but since he's come back, he hasn't really cut the mustard, if we're being honest. And what you want from your NIQs, Joe, is obviously for them to raise the standards. Josh Ioane has been very hit and miss as well.
His line kicking, my God.
And like he's clearly very talented on a fast ground, but his kicking game, he lacks control. So in that regard, I don't think it's a surprise that they've gone back to JJ Hanrahan at 10, who's obviously out the door, going back to Munster at the end of the season, with Matthew Devine inside of him, who I think has been excellent as well. So
funny, just on the defence, like there is a perception that gets thrown around, like, oh, like this is a perpetual years-long issue, which it is. But go back to when they actually won the league. They scored a lot of good tries in the Patland, but they actually conceded a very low number of points. I think they won the final maybe 22-10 against Leinster. They beat them in the sports grounds earlier that year. It was like 14-3 or 10-3 or something like that. So they actually conceded very few points that year as well when they were actually winning the league, as well as their attack really clicking. Now it's just their attack consistently clicks, but they've lost any bit of kind of ability to keep the scoreboard down at all on the opposition.
The Six Nations continues for the women in Cork on Saturday. It's a 4:45 kickoff at Virgin Media Park. They welcome England to town, who have been winning Grand Slams since 2018, I think. Top of my head.
Yeah, it was. We had this chat the other day.
Yeah. So, look, this is not the game on which to judge Ireland and their improvement. This is a damage limitation exercise. That is the blunt truth, albeit the players won't talk about it in those terms. England are just by a distance the best team in the world. Even France haven't beat them in any number of years now, can't beat them, and they're the 4th ranked team in the world. Ireland were so much better in Parma. That was their best performance in the Six Nations in years. Adele McMahon and Enya Breen have been ruled out through injury. Dorothy Wall inexplicably dropped for the game against Italy, is back in. No surprises. She was very good when she came on, and Brittany Hogan was good off the bench as well, so she returns as well. They scored more tries, they defended well, so they go into this game with a degree of confidence. But it's difficult to preview a game like this. It is just going to be who kept them to 50? Italy kept them to kind of 48 points, and that was seen as a good day. Like, there's a degree here of, like, if Ireland can keep England to 40 points, that's a great step forward. That's kind of where the
like
situation
42-14 would be like, that's progress.
Yeah.
But I don't know, like, it sounds kind of very patronising, but it would be progress at the same time. You know, like
it would. Yeah.
Like, considering they ran France pretty close, and it ought to have been closer if they'd nailed those conversions. And France, while they haven't beaten England in a long time, a lot of those scorelines have been pretty close as well. So
they're getting worse. The gap is growing. France are kind of on the slide of touch, but they're
not getting completely trounced. Like, so, like, we'll be interested to see if there's any modicum of competitiveness for even a period. Because I do think it looks like they're a firm third, which is progress in this tournament. England clearly are much better than everybody else, but I actually am fascinated just to see how big the gap is, because Ireland have clearly made massive strides.
Yeah, I like first half in particular. Look, the game may wilt as a contest, but I agree with you. Like, it'd be quite something if they could get a good start and put it up to England for the first time in forever.
Yeah, I was over in Welford Road a couple of years ago covering their game against England, and that was a pretty tough day. I'm trying to think of the scoreline.
Was that the day that
Emer Considine got a bad injury? I think
Sene Nopu got sent off.
No, don't think so. Emer Considine broke her leg in that game. That's what stands out. It was just a complete horror show from start to finish, and that was at the kind of, you know, the depths of that women's team. And like, I think they will be competitive for spells in this game. I think we've seen enough. The improvements that they've made across the board over the last year to 18 months have been remarkable. But the improvements that they made from within a week from France into Italy, all the things that they'd spoken about, their handling errors, you know, Dan O'Brien's kicking game, things like that, were excellent against Italy. So they're clearly on an upward trajectory. This, much like Leinster have picked their first choice backline, this is the first choice Irish pack, which, you know, I think they'll take a lot of confidence from. I was like you, Joe, I was really surprised that Dorothy Wall was dropped for the last game. I think Adele McMahon is a bit of a glue player, a bit like a Peter O'Mahony player. She's exceptional in the back row, but Brittany Hogan gives you a bit more explosivity, I think. So that back row is exceptional. Brittany Hogan, Erin King, Aoife Wafer. I suppose it's, will they have any platform to play off? But I think they're going into this game at the weekend. It's at home. It'll probably be in front of a good crowd down in Cork. Far more confident they would have been, like that game I talked about a couple of years ago in Welford Road. I think some of their attack has been so impressive, and it's not just what they're doing with the ball, it's what they're doing off the ball. Aoife Dalton, I've been really impressed with, and her kind of lines of running off the ball, I spoke about Craig Casey doing it last week, speaks to an attacking system that is really confident in what they're doing at the moment. You look at their invention around their line-out plays, Dorothy Wall central to that. Alex Codling has come in and done a brilliant job. It's my understanding, obviously he's been working with Munster, it's my understanding that Munster are trying to get him in on a permanent basis after the World Cup this autumn. That's how good this guy is. So in fairness to the IRFU, they've put a strong coaching staff around him. There's a much better balance now in terms of the sevens players coming back, and we're seeing the rewards, albeit a couple of years later. So I'm optimistic that they'll be competitive in aspects, but obviously England are an awesome team.
Very good, fellas. Great chat. Will, well done. Well
Thanks,
done.
Joe.
Great to have him. Keen.
Thanks for the call up.
Yeah. My producer told me I had to. Enjoy Bordeaux.
Thank you.
Yeah, okay.
Chat to you next week.
Thanks very much, fellas.